Hello and good evening, everyone. On behalf of NTU, welcome to our NTU International Alumni webinar series. So tonight, the topic is about urban gardening, benefits for the home and community. So to speak with us this evening, we have Ms. Chu Chuin-Ru and Mr. Tang Hon Boon to speak to us. And of course, to get the ball rolling, it's my pleasure to welcome Mr. Chris Choi, President of the NTU Alumni Association from Malaysia, to give us his welcome address. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I see a lot of people still dialing in, and just want to say a big thank you to everyone that has taken the effort to dial in. I understand that we have people from 12 countries and some as far as America, so I cannot be saying good evening to everyone. But anyway, good day to wherever you are. Thanks for dialing in, and we are still looking at more people dialing in, but as we got to keep the ball rolling. Beng Hui, thank you so much for inviting me. Do you suggest that I introduce now or give the more participants to dial in a couple of minutes or so?
Yeah, Chris, I think we can start with the introductions.
Sure. All right. So, hey, of a very interesting topic is on what we call urban gardening or urban farming, whatever you call it. But I guess with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of us have been brought back home, so to speak, right? And as we are working from home, I guess we start to think, where can I get my vegetable, etc., etc. So I think the new norm, so to speak, has already been formed. And I think sustainability elements is going to come to settle into this new norm. And we have two great speakers today, actually. One is Chin-Ru, who's going to talk a little bit about, home farming, what you can do. And then we have Hong Boon talking a little bit about community farming. A little bit more about Chin-Ru. Very, very interesting. She's she taught herself gardening or farming, whatever you call it, right? So very interesting, right? I myself never dirty my hands, but after this session, I think I might want to try a little bit Chin-Ru and see where I can go from there. Now she's going to talk about why do you want to do home farming, where we can do home farming, and what can you produce, what can you grow, right? And how you're going to sustain it. So I do not want to talk too much about that. She's the expert. She's the person that's going to bring you, the delightful KPI, which is, according to her, 60% of her vegetables come from my balcony, all right? So now the second speaker, on the other hand, is equally interesting. Hong Boon, which is from NTU, and I'm 1 year older than him, even though he looks older than me. But Hong Boon is actually 1 year my junior, and he's actually a practicing engineer. All through his life, he's doing engineering. But what makes him turn into community farming? That's the interesting part, right? Let's listen to Hong Boon to see why, instead of constructing things, now he wants to grow things, right? And his message was giving back to the society through farming. So without further ado, I shall pass the baton to you, Chin-Ru. Over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris, for introducing me. My name is Chin-Ru. I would like to talk a little bit about how you can start growing vegetables in your garden. Okay, and I'm going to start to share my screen now. So just bear with me for a little while. And I will flip over here. Sorry about this. Okay. So I hope you can see that. My topic today is actually urban farming and specifically growing edibles in Singapore. I'm going to talk about what is urban farming, what you can grow in an urban garden, and what does it actually take to become successful at it. And I can very much tell you, anyone can become a successful urban farmer. I'll be talking about the vegetables I grew, and I really only started growing them in earnest after we all got locked down and I couldn't leave the house, which means it was April of this year. And within just a couple of months, I've managed to grow a lot of vegetables. So I think anyone can do this. I don't have a special background in gardening. I don't have a degree in it, but this is just goes to prove that anyone can do it. Okay, and finally, I'm going to show you a showcase about what you can do with a very, very limited amount of space using this technique called vertical bottle gardening. Okay, so what is urban farming? It's a bit different from open farming, but it talks about growing food in a city or a heavily populated environment. So if you live in Singapore, or you live in a large city like KL, or you live in Bangkok, or you live anywhere where there are lots and lots of people around you, you are definitely in an urban environment. Okay, so of course, being in an urban environment means that there are lots and lots of markets around. There's markets, there's supermarkets, there's so many places where you can buy vegetables. So why on earth would you want to grow your own vegetables? And I think a lot of people felt this way until the lockdown happened. And suddenly we discovered that, hey, we can't get all the vegetables we want to get. And also maybe we want to think a bit more about where our food comes from. So let's talk about why grow your own food. Well, the first thing that of course comes to mind is that you want to support this goal of self-sustainability. So in Singapore, this has become a very big thing. Our government likes to set KPIs. We like to meet them. The current KPI is, I think, growing 30% of our food. I actually think it's very achievable. Over the course of about 5 or 6 months, I slowly developed my garden, and I can quite confidently say that I've been able to grow about 60% of my vegetables. The second reason why you might want to consider growing your own food is because it's a real path to eating more healthily. I don't know if you know this, but about a year ago, the University of California published a study, and it got picked up by a lot of newspapers, including the Straits Times. And what they said was basically that most vegetables lose about 30% of their nutrients within 3 days of harvest. Now, I can tell you that the vegetables that show up even in the wet market, definitely in the supermarket, were harvested more than 3 days ago. In many cases, they're harvested 1 to 2 weeks earlier. If you're talking about a vegetable like spinach, it actually loses 90% of the vitamin C within 24 hours of harvest. So that's a very important reason to consider growing your own vegetables, because you will then be able to derive the maximum amount of nutrition out of them. The next thing you might want to think about is reducing your carbon footprint. This may not be true of other cities, but Singapore imports pretty much all of our vegetables, many of our vegetables. We're starting to grow our own. But those come by air, they come by sea, they come from quite far away. And if you care about the environment and you're saying, oh, I want to do something about climate change, then maybe you should consider eating and buying vegetables grown locally. So these could be vegetables that are grown by someone else locally, or you could grow some of those vegetables yourself in your garden. The next point you might want to think about is being able to choose to grow organically. Technically, organic vegetables need to pass a lot of criteria, so I'm not going to talk about that. But if you grow your own vegetables, you will not be using chemical pesticides on them, which is the very, very first step. You may or may not be using organic fertilizers. I think that's an open topic, but I think the big no-no is chemical fertilizers. And when you do that, you will actually reduce pesticide contamination, which is destroying the soil and the water of many of the cities and countries we live in. But you will also be able to support pollinator species. When you apply chemical pesticides, you kill not only the pests, but you kill every other insect out there. And there are many insects which are very beneficial. And one of them, I would like to say, are insects like bees. If you apply a lot of chemical pesticides on your crops, you will kill bees as well. And National Geographic published this study in 2019, and they talked about the US bee population. And they said the US bee population in 1 year fell by 40%. Worldwide, bees are responsible for pollinating almost $170 billion worth of crops. That means almost all the fruit and vegetables you eat. If we cannot sustain pollinator species, actually the truth is that the global food chain will collapse, because you cannot hand pollinate. There's no other way to do this. So that helps. The last thing you can do is, of course, preserve plant diversity. Big commercial farms tend to plant only one kind of vegetable because it's high yield. And it comes at the expense of all other kinds of crops. When you grow yourself, you can choose to grow heirloom vegetables. You can grow older vegetables. You can grow all kinds of vegetables. You can grow non-GMO. GMO is not bad in itself, but there's so much control by big companies like Monsanto that it means that those seeds are not, they're not usually propagatable. So you kind of break the ability of you to preserve crops and seeds going forward. So preserving plant diversity is another good thing to do. Okay, so those are all the reasons why you might want to grow your own food. There are some special considerations when you grow in an urban environment. And the first thing, and I'm going to talk a lot about this later on, is that you're pretty much going to be, many of us are limited by space. Living in an urban environment means we live close to each other. So we may only have a balcony, a little corridor, maybe you only have part of a windowsill to grow things in. So that's something to consider. The other thing is that, of course, we usually have restricted access to sunlight and water. The third thing that will happen is soil quality. You're not growing your plants in the soil, you're growing them in pots. So you're going to have to spend a bit more time looking after that. In Singapore, I don't know about other parts of the world, but mosquito and pest control issues are a big, big thing. More people have died from dengue in Singapore this year than COVID-19. And it's something that we really have to take care of. So when you grow plants in pots, you tend to have an issue with mosquitoes. Because we live close to each other, we have to respect common spaces. We're often growing in shared areas. And I'm very sorry to report this, but very often there may be plant damage and plant theft. This happens if you grow your plants in fairly high trafficked areas, but it's just part of it. I mean, I think when you grow in an environment where there are lots of other people around, you may have to accept that you will have some loss of your crops. Okay, so before I actually go further, I want to talk about what you can actually grow on a balcony or indoors. So a lot of people say, oh, that's great, Chunru, but what can I grow? And I thought this way too. I thought in the beginning, there aren't that many plants I'm going to be able to grow. But I was very, very surprised. So what I'm going to do is start talking about what kind of plants you can choose and how you can proceed with that. I'm going to show you a whole bunch of pictures of plants. And I made a decision that I would only show you pictures of plants that I grew myself. This is to keep it real. So I have not taken any pictures off the internet and said I grew them. Everything you see is going to have been grown from seed and grown between April of this year and about October of this year. So about a span of 6 months, okay? And that's just to show you that it's possible. Anyone can do this, okay? So let's talk about it. If you are just starting off and you have a small garden, the thing I would encourage you to do is start by planting herbs. Why would you plant herbs? Well, herbs are one of those plants which have a huge impact relative to their size. Most herbs don't need a lot of space, but they're intensely fragrant. They're usually much more expensive when you buy them in the market. And a little bit goes a long way. The other reason why you might want to start with herbs is that they are actually quite pest resistant. Most pests don't like herbs because herbs tend to have very strong taste. And so if you're just starting out with gardening, then you will have fewer problems if you start with herbs. So these are some of the herbs which I grew in my garden. They're all grown in pots. One of the big things that I found very interesting about growing herbs was that in Singapore, it's very possible to grow Mediterranean herbs. So if you have a look at this, I've grown bay leaves, I've grown Italian basil, and I've grown rosemary as well, right? I also have grown things like oregano and mint. If you make sure that your potting mix is very freely draining, you will be able to grow most Mediterranean herbs here. And these are big wins, because if you go to cold storage and you buy a little bunch of Italian basil, it's going to cost you $3. But if you grow your own basil, you'll be harvesting it almost every week at least, and a big bunch at that, okay? Some of the other things which are really easy to grow are things like chili padi. Sorry, I can't. Pandan, I've grown pandan, spring onions, lemongrass, curry leaves, all kinds of stuff like that. So any kind of local herb, even ulam raja, they're all very easy to grow in pots on a balcony. One of the things I want to highlight to you, though, is that sometimes you may be able to find substitution herbs. So a lot of people like to grow coriander. I think the Cantonese name for coriander is yin sai. But coriander doesn't grow well now in our climate because it needs a lot of sunshine, but a cool climate. But it's a wonderful herb if you cook a lot of Chinese food. But you can grow another herb that is almost exactly the same. And it's this herb called culantro, and you can see it down here. Culantro is actually a relative of coriander, and it's found in Vietnam. It's called sawtooth coriander over there. It's also found in Mexico, where it's actually called culantro. It looks different, but when you chop it up and you eat it, it tastes exactly like the coriander which we normally have. So there are workarounds. You know, you could grow. You may find that I can't grow coriander, but hey, I can grow culantro instead. So as a very first step to starting your garden, I really suggest you start with herbs. Or if you have a very small garden, start with herbs. If you've become very good at growing herbs, then you may start thinking, well, what else can I grow? The next bunch of group of vegetables I encourage you to grow are these leafy greens, beans, and okra. And the reason I would suggest these is because these are very, very high yielding vegetables. So once you can grow herbs, you want to say, okay, how do I produce volume so that I have enough to eat all the time? All the vegetables you show I grew here are also, well, number one, they're easy to grow. Number two, they're also relatively pest resistant. You'll find that if a vegetable is, or a plant is native to our region, it will be more pest resistant. If you want to get really exotic and grow things like, I don't know, Boston lettuce and stuff, then you will have to up your game in terms of your ability to take care of the plant. Not that it's impossible, it's just a lot more work. So kangkong, I grew 4 pots of kangkong like this, and I was harvesting them once a week and enough for 3 meals each time. It was so bad that everybody said to me, please stop growing this because we don't want to eat it anymore. Sweet potato leaves, you won't be able to really harvest a lot of sweet potatoes at the end of it because you're growing them in pots, but you will be able to harvest the leaves continuously during the growing season. And of course, if you stir fry with belacan, it's great. Bayam spinach grows very easily. Malabar spinach, also known, I think, as Ceylon spinach, also known as Sisu spinach, is very, very easy to grow. Okra or lady's finger. So this is what I mean by plant diversity. This lady's finger on the far left is one that I bought from the market. That's the regular size you see. The next one you see is something called, a variety called Star of David. And Star of David is actually an Israeli varietal. It is very, very fat. It's like that fat. And it's very, very tender. It doesn't grow too long, but because it's such a fat lady's finger, it's wonderful for things like yong tau fu. And the last one is a kind of lady's finger called longhorn. It's a hybrid which grows very, very long. Typically, they're 28 to 30 centimeters long. So when you grow your own vegetables, you get to choose what seeds to grow, and you get to choose things which are much, much more interesting. Beans grow really easily in our climate. So not peas, but things like wing beans and French beans, long beans. All of these are very easy to grow. They produce pretty much continuously once they get started. They had an advantage of being what's called nitrogen fixers. So they capture nitrogen from the air, they give it back to the soil, which means that they actually enrich the soil versus taking nutrients out of it. And of course, you can grow any kind of Asian green, like bok choy, nai bai. All of those grow well in our climate. Okay, so once you have the herbs going, then I suggest that you grow these kinds of vegetables because these are the vegetables which actually will deliver food to your table every day, every week. Okay. Okay, so say you're successful in this. I want to talk about this other group of vegetables. They're often neglected because people think they can't grow them. But they're the Solanaceae and the cucurbits. Basically, they're things like eggplants, tomatoes, and any kind of melon and cucumbers. The reason why they're very interesting is that although they have fairly large fruits, they are mostly vining. So they grow on vines, which means they actually take up very little space. So if you have a wall or you have a trellis, they just climb up there and they're very, very productive plants. So on my balcony, I have been growing things like cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, pumpkins, loofah, eggplant, bitter gourd, and I even grew Hokkaido melons. I don't know if you know this, the supermarket called Don Don Donki, but I went to Don Don Donki and I bought this rather expensive Hokkaido melon. And then after I ate it, I said, oh, you know, maybe we can plant these seeds. And yes, surprisingly, Hokkaido melons can grow. Actually, they grow perfectly in a tropical climate. In Hokkaido, they grow them in greenhouses where they keep the temperature at 28 to 30 degrees Celsius. But in Singapore, you can leave them outdoors and it'll be 28 to 30 degrees Celsius. So yes, you can grow that too. One point to note is this: all plants, things like cherry tomatoes and cucumbers, a lot of people think that those are cold climate or cool climate plants, but you can buy seeds for hybrids which are specially created to grow in the tropics. And they're usually called lowland hybrids. So these cherry tomatoes are special lowland hybrids, and so are these cucumbers. I've also previously grown Japanese cucumbers, which were also lowland hybrids. So again, what I want to say is that, you know, it is very possible to do this. You just need to choose the right seed varietal as well, okay? And finally, I want to talk about what you can actually grow if you have almost no space and almost no sunshine. Even if all you had was an apartment with a window, you could still grow things. The first one is bean sprouts, any kind of sprout. I don't know if you know about this, but when lockdown began, there was this Malaysian lady and she went viral. I don't know if she went viral around the world, but she definitely went viral in Singapore. And she went viral because she was growing bean sprouts in Coca-Cola bottles. So of course, everyone tried it. And yes, I tried it. And yes, you can grow bean sprouts in a Coca-Cola bottle very, very easily. And that's the result. But you can grow things called microgreens, which means things like radish sprouts, Brussels sprouts, cabbage seeds. You can just plant them, and in 5 days, you get these shoots, which are little sprouts. And you can, tom yao is another kind of microgreen. So you can stir fry them, you can add them to salads. And the nice thing about them is they usually take about 5 to 7 days from when you first germinate the seeds. Finally, even if you have no sunshine and you live indoors, you can actually grow vegetables under LED grow lights. So I did an experiment. I bought a full spectrum LED grow light. So this means daylight spectrum with some booster of red and blue light. And I grew lettuce, so, which, and they grew well because they were indoors. So there were no pests, there was no wind, there was no damage. So they were relatively easy to grow, okay? So these are some of the things which you can actually grow as an urban farmer. So you're going to say to me, Chinru, that's really nice, but I'm sure it's not that easy to do. You know, how do I become a successful urban farmer? I'm saying, well, it's not that difficult. You can definitely become a successful urban farmer, okay? But the first thing you have to do is you have to understand your garden, okay? So there are two things that home gardeners really cannot change. And these are the things that determine what you can grow and what kind of gardening system you want to invest in. And these are sunshine and space. You know, if you live in an apartment with no sunshine, there's not much you can do about changing that. If you have a balcony and it gets nothing but full sunshine, again, you know, that's what you have to work with, and space. Okay. So let's talk a bit about each of these. So we've said you need to then choose the right kind of growing systems and plants based on that. So let's talk about sunshine first, because actually sunshine's the most important thing about determining what you grow in your garden. Most people will define sunshine or garden conditions as having shade, partial shade, or full sunshine. So shade doesn't mean no sun. Shade means maybe about 2 hours of sunshine or 2 to 4 hours of very, very bright indirect light in a day. Partial shade is usually defined as maybe 4 hours of sunshine a day. And full sun is usually 6 to 8 hours of full sun every day. So if you have a situation where you have shade mainly, then you would be looking at growing things like microgreens and sprouts. Why? Because they're grown from seed and most of their growth is fueled by the energy stored in the seeds. So they don't need sunshine to actually grow. At least they don't need sunshine to grow those first 2 or 3 leaves. You need them to produce before you eat them, okay? The other very, very interesting thing you can grow, you actually have nothing but shade, are mushrooms. There's an entire field around people growing mushrooms. Usually they grow them under their beds. I haven't tried it, but they're grown in coffee grounds, and they're kind of fun to do as well. Okay, if your garden has partial shade, well, there's a lot of things you can grow. Many herbs, especially some of the Mediterranean herbs, the more leafy herbs, do a lot better in partial shade than full sun. They kind of burn in full sun, or they get stringy and bitter if you put them in too much sunshine. So things like Italian basil, culantro, mint, spring onions, they do great in partial shade. A lot of the more tender leafy vegetables like lettuce, rocket, mizuna will also grow better in partial shade than full sun. If you grow these in full sun, they'll grow. But what will happen is that they do something called bolting, which means that they start producing flowers and seeds very, very fast. And once the plant produces flowers and seeds, the taste changes, it becomes bitter, and it won't be that nice, tender salad green that you were growing it for, okay? There are some vining vegetables which grow well in partial shade, like French beans, wing beans, cucumbers. And finally, you can actually grow some root vegetables. So things like sweet potatoes, radish, gingers, yams, they prefer partial shade to full shade, okay? Full sun, sorry, full sun. If you have full sun, well, you can grow most tropical vegetables. Herbs like rosemary, lemongrass, chilies, pandan, curry leaves, all of these do great in full sun. Many of the Asian vegetables, leafy vegetables like kangkong, bok choy, choy sam, all these do well in full sun. The vining vegetables that do better in full sun are mostly the beans, bitter gourds, and pumpkins. And you can also actually grow fruit trees. I would say that most fruiting plants and vegetables, if you're growing them for their fruits, they actually need full sun. They need that to fuel the sugars that they need to create those fruits. So fruiting trees and fruiting vegetables are things like tomatoes, eggplants, figs, dragon fruit. These are all the kinds of things which need full sun. The other thing I want to say is that most gardens are never really one or the other. Most gardens, even a balcony, are a mix of these conditions. So you may have some parts of your garden which are full sun, and then some parts of them which are partial shade. And when you're starting up your garden, what I encourage you to do is just spend some time looking at it. Look at where the sun falls, figure out how many hours it is, and kind of map out where you think the sunshine is. And then based on that, you can decide what kind of vegetables you want to grow, okay? So that's sunshine. Let's talk about space. Okay, basically what happens with space is that the space tends to determine what kind of equipment you can invest in. So this is Singapore, so all the spaces are very small. I'm gonna say small is 1 by 2 meters. So you have just a little corridor, very small balcony. Medium would be a 5 by 2 meter space. Bigger than that is greater than 5 by 2 meters. If you live in a place which has shade mainly, and you have a very small apartment, you're really looking at only sprouting baskets. Just focus on growing things like microgreens and sprouts, and maybe some herbs, you should be fine. If you have a bit more space, you can start to invest in either semi-hydroponics or complete hydroponics with LED grow lights. So earlier on, I showed you some lettuce I grew with LED grow lights. So once you put LED grow lights in, you can have a timer and say, okay, I want 14 hours of light on my vegetables, and they will grow. Why do I recommend hydroponics if it's shade? Because if you have a very shady place, that means you don't get a lot of UV light. And UV light is quite important if you're growing in soil. If you don't have a lot of UV light on your soil, you'll end up with a lot of soil-borne pests. And those tend to bring more disease to your plants. So if you really, really don't have a lot of sunshine, I recommend that you consider hydroponics. But the caveat is hydroponics is a much more technical system. You will have to test the pH level every day. You kind of have to be quite committed for it. If you have gardens which are in partial shade or full sun, then the size just simply determines how large your containers can be. So in a small one, you can think about small container gardening or vertical tower gardening, which I'm going to talk about. Medium gardens, you can start growing things up walls, bigger containers, big gardens. You can have big trellises, raised bed gardening, grow fruit trees in huge containers. One of the things that you can do if you have full sun, are hugely committed, and have a lot of space is go into something called aquaponics. And what happens with aquaponics is that you have the system where you grow fish, you have a fish pond or a huge fish tank, and then you have a filtration and you have a kind of a water system that comes out, pump, and it goes and it runs hydroponics into your vegetables. So then you have a complete system where the fish basically produce the fertilized water that feeds the hydroponic system that grows to your plants. The plants filter the waste as they grow, and then that filtered water goes back into your fish. So you get to harvest not only vegetables, you get to grow and harvest your own fish as well. So that's quite ambitious. Okay, all right. So the one thing I want to talk about space is think in 3D. And so these are some pictures of things of my garden. If you have a wall, think about not just planting things in pots around it, but think about letting plants grow up the wall. So these are cucumbers on the left. This is, I think, the beginning of a wing bean. So let them grow up walls. If you have an overhanging balcony, you can grow plants in hanging pots. And this is actually mint. It grows really well in a hanging pot. You can grow a lot of herbs in hanging pots, actually. And then if you have more space, you can actually build a trellis. And once you build a trellis, not only can you do the vining plants on top receive full sun, but you create a situation where you have partial shade underneath and you can actually grow a lot of plants under there as well. So don't feel that, oh, I have this small space and I really can't grow anything. There are many, many ways that you can find space to grow things in if you think about it a bit more creatively and you think about it in 3D, okay? Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is plant health. So everyone says, oh, you know, I started growing these, they were great, they grew for 2 months and then they all just died because all these pests came along. And yeah, it's true, you have to look after your plant. But one thing that I need to talk about with plants is that many of us think that they're these helpless little creatures that wait for us to look after them so they can produce fruits and leaves. That's actually not true. Plants are actually very sophisticated living organisms which, you know, have actually developed a lot of their own defense mechanisms. So if you look at many plants, they are actually able to take care of themselves as long as they are healthy. So the plants that tend to get sick are the plants which somehow aren't growing in ideal conditions. So what you want to do in general is make sure that you take care of your plant holistically. So the first thing that you would do, I would say, is obviously you're growing these to eat, you will want to use organic pesticides. So you will use things like neem oil, ecoenzymes, sulfur soap. But organic pesticides are by nature very, very mild. They're not systemic. After you put them on, they disappear very quickly within an hour or so. So if you don't hit the pest directly, you're not going to kill it. So you pretty much need repeated applications and regular applications for it to work. The other thing you can do, which helps many plants, is to do this thing called companion planting. So companion planting started because of this whole movement towards something called permaculture. So permaculture basically says that, you know, when you look at plants growing in nature, they don't grow individually. They grow as an ecosystem. Commercial farms have a lot of pest problems and they have to use a lot of pesticides because they are monocultures. They grow one kind of plant, it goes on for acres and acres. So the same pest multiplies and gets attracted to the place. But in nature, you'll find that if you have a certain kind of plant growing, then a few other plants of a different species grow around it and they help each other. So you can actually look up tables and say, what are companion plants? So if you talk about tomatoes, the companion plant to a tomato is actually a basil. So what the basil does is it actually, because it's a herb, it tends to discourage other pests. They don't like the smell of basil. But basil and tomato also release, somehow release nutrients into the soil, which they exchange. And most people have found that tomatoes taste more tasty and basil tastes more fragrant when they're grown together in the same pot. There are plants like marigolds. Marigolds, French marigolds, secrete a chemical or a kind of, they secrete a chemical in their roots. And what that does is it tends to kill off this soil disease called root nematodes. So if you grow marigolds next to some of your other plants, they will protect them from root nematodes. And also marigolds actually tend to, because of the the smell and the way they are, they tend to also discourage things like beetles. So if you truly go into companion planting, you'll find that your garden becomes very colorful and very, very interesting as well. But not only that, you'll have plants that protect each other, okay? The next thing you need to think about is actually crop rotation. You're growing things in pots. Don't keep growing the same vegetable in the same pot, because if you do that, the types of pests that like that vegetable grow in the soil, multiply. Everybody knows in the neighborhood knows that that's the pot which, you know, the eggplants grow in, so all the pests will keep on going back there. So what you want to do is grow different kinds of plants. So you need to mix them up. So if you've grown a very heavy nitrogen feeder like corn in a pot one year, maybe next year you want to grow beans because those are nitrogen fixers. The next thing is soil renewal. You're growing things. So we always focus with plants on things like, oh, the branches, the leaves, the flowers, the fruits. But we often forget that actually the root system of a plant is at least as extensive as what you see above. And this is where the plant gets most of its nutrients from. So if you're growing things in pots, one of the things you need to think about first is you need to make sure that the soil mix you give it is right for that plant. So there are all kinds of formulas. When you really get into this, you'll say, okay, I have a Mediterranean plant. It likes to have really freely draining soil. So I'm going to have, 30% perlite, certain amount of volcanic sand, certain amount of potting mix. Maybe I need to put some bone. So you can get really fancy with this and start creating your own secret soil formulas for all your different plants. Or you can simply go out and buy vegetable potting mix and start with that and then slowly adjust it as time goes by. But with soil renewal, you need to think about as plants grow and you change plants out, what you do. You have to add compost to it. You have to add some pumice to it. What can you do to make this soil better for the plant you're growing it? Okay, the next one that you need to think about is, and this is a really wonderful thing that's happened lately, is that you can buy disease-resistant hybrids. So again, if you're planting this yourself, you can go out and buy the seeds you want to grow. But very often when you're buying seeds, you can actually choose seeds which are, for example, wilt-resistant, fungus-resistant, resistant to certain viruses which like to attack this particular plant. So you can buy those kinds of seeds with those kinds of hybrids, and if they're disease-resistant, then half your work's done for you. It's not going to get as sick and as infected as as another plant which doesn't have that. The other things that you need to think about, of course, are things like organic fertilizers. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but there are many kinds of fertilizers that you can use. And finally, just making sure that your plant stays clean and healthy. So it means pruning. It means tidying away all the dead leaves, stuff like that, okay, because they harbor disease. Okay, so if you can do all of this together, your plant will be able to look after itself and pretty much fight off most pests. I can tell you that when I first started to grow organically, I almost gave up because I had previously used chemical pesticides in my garden. I was growing ornamental plants and they were great. They looked beautiful. But I thought, well, I don't want the bees to die, so I'm going to go organic. And the first 3 months, I thought, it's just terrible. There were holes in all my plants. Everything seemed to be eaten. But after 3 months, it kind of reset itself. I started noticing that a lot of friendly predator insects, pests would come in that would eat the ones that were eating my plants. And about 4 or 5 months into the process, the whole garden reset itself. And I can tell you, I don't put any pesticides anymore in my garden at all, the ornamental garden, and they're all healthy. So it takes some patience. But it's once you can create this very balanced ecosystem, you will find that you have pests. There will be predators that come in. Okay. All right. So I'm just going to wrap this up more quickly because I think I might be running out of time. But I just wanted to show you this final thing, which is a vertical tower garden. So you can say, oh, Chinru, I don't have the garden you have. I don't have a balcony as big. You can still grow a lot of stuff. So the vertical bottle garden was actually kind of a variation that was invented by someone called Willem van Cothem. He's from the University of Ghent in Belgium. And he was looking for a way in which people in less developed countries and who lived in urban communities would be able to grow vegetables. And one of their problems was space and water and even like just material to start a garden with. And so this method actually uses recycled bottles. It requires minimal soil, minimal space, and it's all watered at one go from a single point. Okay, so this is what a vertical bottle garden can look like, but this is how you actually do it. There's a wiki how link at the bottom if you want to see it. But basically, you just go and collect a bunch of plastic bottles, 1.5 to 2 liter bottles. You cut a hole in the side, and that's where you plant your seed in. You fill them up with soil. You remove the caps, and you stack them one on top of the other after cutting off the ends, the base of each one. And what happens is it creates this tower. And it's very easy to water because you just water from the top and the water goes all the way through. You also fertilize from the top, use a water-soluble fertilizer, and it goes through from there as well. The beauty of this system is that actually, because there's so little soil that's exposed and the watering is straight through, you actually have very, very few pests. I was actually able to grow bok choy in this system without applying even organic pesticides, and they were fine. So I'm going to show you as proof what that could look like. So this is the bottle system 5 days after planting the seeds. This is after 3 weeks. After 6 weeks, you can see they were growing really well, and I harvested at 8 weeks. So when I harvested these bok choy, they were 20 centimeters in diameter, but they were still really tender and really crispy because they were actually still very young. And here's me with the bok choy. Okay, so if you don't have space, you don't have time to do a lot of watering, you don't even want to do any pesticides, you can still grow bok choy like this. So I think really anyone can do this. I really encourage you to try. I think you'll enjoy it, and maybe your family will tell you they never want to eat bok choy again, but you know, that's just something they'll have to deal with. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. We do have a few questions for our speaker here, so I'll just go to the chat box and read out the questions. So first question here is it safe to use polystyrene boxes for growing vegetables? These boxes are used for transporting fresh produce.
Yes, I have used them. Polystyrene is actually quite stable, which is one of the problems with it. And you're not doing anything with it that will really, I think, result in a lot of decomposition. You're not heating up, you're not doing anything else. You're actually usually just watering. One of the nice things about growing vegetables in polystyrene boxes in Singapore is that when you grow them on a balcony, our balconies get very hot. And very often the roots of the plants get hot. And when you grow them in a polystyrene box, the polystyrene insulates the soil and it keeps the roots cooler. So I've actually found that plants, edibles tend to grow a lot better and a lot faster in these polystyrene boxes. I'm not an expert, but I've been eating them out of polystyrene boxes and I think I'm still quite healthy.
Yeah, it works. Okay, so we have another question. Did you grow spring onions and curry leaves from the seeds? How long did the germination take?
Okay, so it's pretty much impossible to grow curry plants from cuttings. I tried, and then I read that you couldn't do it. But if you get a seed, then it's pretty fast. I mean, if you put it in the soil and it's in good conditions, it'll probably germinate in 5 days, at most maybe 1.5 weeks. Once it takes root, it grows pretty well. Spring onions are really interesting. If you're terrible at gardening, you can still grow spring onions, because those spring onions, what you do is, you know, those little shallots you buy from, if you keep them too long, they'll start sprouting. And most people just throw them away. They say, oh, because you can't use them as shallots. They go all mushy inside. But if you just half bury them in soil, they actually turn into spring onions. And that's exactly what I do. I just take all those shallots that I haven't had time to eat, put them in a little bit of soil in the pot, and they'll turn into spring onions. Yeah.
Okay. One of the challenges with growing herbs is often ending up with having more than you can use. What's the best way to manage overgrowth as a result of limited harvesting?
You must harvest, you must prune. So there's 2 reasons. If you don't prune your plant, it will be more prone to disease because it's overgrown. So the inner branches don't receive the sunlight and the airflow they need. So I would say harvest. What to do with the excess? Give them to your neighbors, give them to your friends, especially give them to your neighbors, and they will start doing things like help you water your plants when you're not around, be really nice to you, do stuff like that. But on top of that, you can always, if you have too much basil, it's very easy to just grind it up with some olive oil and salt and turn it into pesto, which you can just bottle and keep. You can dry your herbs. Rosemary, bay leaves. I regularly harvest them and I just put them in the sun and dry them. Once they're dried, they can keep almost indefinitely. Same thing with oregano. So herbs are really, really easy.
We have a question about beans. How do you grow long beans successfully from seeds? I've no luck so far.
Okay, so there's actually two kinds of long beans. One of them is a traditional kind, which is the yard long beans. They climb. The other kind is actually a new variety, which is called the bush variety. I don't know if it's going to show up, but I don't know if you can see this. Does it show up? I think my wonderful background masks it. Okay, can't see it. But you can grow a kind of long bean, which is a bush variety, and it's quite disease resistant. One thing about long beans is they really need a lot of sunshine. They like sunshine. They can grow in partial sun, but they do like sunshine. So I guess without really looking at your conditions, it would be hard for me to say, but I would say that they're relatively easy to grow from seed. Start them somewhere hot. I actually found that there are a lot of tropical plants which need heat to germinate. Like, for example, bitter gourd. I tried in the early stages to grow my bitter gourd in those little pots indoors, thinking that it would be better. They never germinated. Same thing happened to my chili. Same thing happened to my eggplant. When I gave up and I said, okay, forget it. I'm just going to put it in the pot that I think it's going to grow in, and that's out there in sunshine. With the heat and the rain that happened, it helped to crack the outer seeds, and it helped to kickstart that growth. So there are actually many, many tropical vegetables and seeds which kind of need heat to start the process. Yeah.
Okay, we've got a few more questions here. What can I use as pesticide that are natural and cheap to get rid of grasshoppers and insects like bugs?
Wow. Okay. Grasshoppers are very difficult to get rid of. And insects, it depends on what insects you have. I would say that one of the most effective ones, if you're not quite sure what you're dealing with, is actually neem oil. So you can buy neem oil in most nurseries. You need to dilute it. It's quite strong. You dilute it and you spray it. Neem oil is kind of a psychotic for many of these insects. When they eat it, it does something to their brains and they kind of get disoriented and many of them die. So grasshoppers don't like it. The only thing about it is that it doesn't stay on your plant. So once it rains, after a few hours, it will degrade and it won't be effective. So if you have a really bad infestation, then you need to spray maybe once every day, then maybe once for a couple of days, and once every 2 days, and maybe only once a week. Neem oil and many of these sort of white oils will actually burn your leaves if you spray in the daytime. So you need to spray at night. The other reason why you might want to spray at night is that a lot of the pollinator species don't come out at night. So if you're spraying it at night, then you're less likely to harm things like bees that although it hasn't been shown to actually harm bees. So neem oil is actually quite good. If you're actually hit by caterpillars, then the most effective thing that you can do is buy this. It's a biological control. It's called dipel. And what it is a kind of bacteria. It's a variation of the bacteria we use to kill mosquitoes, which you put in those mosquito briquettes. But you dilute it in water, you spray on the leaves, and this bacteria only kills caterpillars. It will not kill anything else. There's a version of this bacteria that only kills beetles. It's not available in Singapore. I've never found it. It would be nice to have it. Those are more expensive, but on a daily basis, I would say that if you can keep your plants very healthy, and you can also make your own pesticide, and it's also a fertilizer using these things called ecoenzyme. I don't know ecoenzyme, but you can read about it. But ecoenzyme, if you're using it, you need to use it very often. Every couple of days, you're gonna have to spray. Otherwise, it doesn't work. The other things that you can do are you can make a solution with sulfur soap. You can just buy that old-fashioned sulfur soap from, I think, ABC Mart or one of these places, dilute it in water, add a little bit of vegetable oil and spray. That also works. But again, like I said, all these organic pesticides are not very strong. My real point to you is do all the other things I said. Keep your plant healthy, keep your area clean. The other thing is this, don't expect your plant to be perfect. You have to give and take. So, you know, you're growing these plants as vegetables for yourself. You need to understand that there are going to be other little creatures that will eat these plants. So you will have some holes. There will be some damage from grasshoppers. But if it doesn't impact your plant's ability to produce enough vegetables and fruits for yourself and isn't impacting the health of your plant, it's okay. In fact, they found that if a predator actually comes and eats some of the plant usually responds by growing even more vigorously. It's a form of pruning. So there's this balance that happens in nature. You know, we always look at these videos and we think, wow, because my tomato isn't, especially when you go to the supermarket, oh, you know, my tomatoes don't look like that. Well, you know, they throw away half of the produce before it even reaches the supermarket because it's not perfect. So you're going to have to understand that when you grow your own plants, they're not going to always look perfect. Your fruits are not going to always be perfect, but they're still nutritionally going to be good. And, you know, that is part of the growth process as for plants, right? Perfection isn't actually normal. Okay.
Okay, we have two related questions here. Should we mix dead leaves into the soil or clear them away? And for soil renewal, do you add on to the existing soil or replace the soil totally?
Okay, so dead leaves. The problem with dead leaves in a pot is that sometimes the dead leaves overwhelm everything else in the pot. And then they become kind of a breeding ground for a lot of other little creatures. So in a sense, it's not good and it's not bad, but it creates a condition that can encourage pests in your pots. So what I usually do with dead leaves is I have a different pot further away in my garden and I put all my dead leaves there. And if you do that regularly and you keep layering them on, and it's actually a kind of compost, but not full composting. There's so many ways to do composting. I'm not going to talk about them today, but it's a very simple form of composting. So as you clear your leaves up, you put them in that pot further away and under the sun, and make sure the pot has drainage holes, and it will actually slowly decompose into a kind of compost that you can then mix with other stuff and use. So you don't have to throw them away, but I would not put them back amongst your plants simply because the pot is a very small environment. So once you unbalance it, your whole plant suffers. So you don't want that to happen. So talking about soil renewal, well, with soil, I would not throw it all away. It depends. Okay, so if you look at your soil and you pick it up and you realize, hey, there are root mealies in my soil. Okay, this is some kind of horrible little mealy bug that lives in your soil. I probably wouldn't use that. So I put it far away in some corner of the garden, which receives a lot of sun, put it there, let the sunshine and UV light and whatever else it is do its work on it before I would ever use it again. But if you don't have this kind of root-based infestation, you can, and your plants have been healthy all along, you can continue to use it. And what I would do is, usually when I harvest the plants, I will take it out and I'll take all the roots out and stuff. And you'll maybe be left with less soil than you started off with because the roots tend to pull out some soil, right? Then you enrich your soil. So you put in things like eggshells for calcium. You might put in compost that you buy. You can put chicken manure in it. You know, you can make your own banana peel fertilizer. So you just mix it, coffee grounds, mix it all in. And then if you need to lighten the soil, you'll be adding things like perlite, sand, stuff like that. And let that pot maybe rest for a couple of weeks. Let it kind of mature before you then put something else and grow.
We've got several more questions, but only have time for one more before we invite the next speaker. So this question is about rainwater. How do you control too much water from the rain?
Okay, so a really important question in Singapore, especially this month. So there's two ways to look at the weather. The first thing is that when you grow things in pots, you usually choose a soil mix which is very free draining. which means that your mix may have up to 30% of something called perlite, which is a kind of volcanic rock, very porous, or sand, or pumice stone, or one of these things. And you can tell because when you pour water into your pot, you should, within a couple of seconds, see water coming out of the base. If you see lots of water sitting in your pot, you don't have the right mix. So you want to make sure that when you grow things in pots, the water drains freely. And then what happens is that during the rainy season, if it rains a lot, the water will just go through. Okay? Your roots will stay moist, but they won't be waterlogged. So the problem with waterlogged roots is that they die, they drown. They need air to breathe as well. So if you have very free draining soil, you don't have a situation where the roots are submerged. There's another way to think about the rainy season. We always think that Singapore only has one kind of weather. It's not true. We actually have a cooler season at the end of the year, which is the rainy season. And I don't know if if you've never grown edibles, one of the things I have to tell you is that you need to plant them again and again. You know, they usually live for 5 months, you finish your harvest, it's time to change the plant. What I usually do is that when the weather gets cooler like this and it rains a whole lot, I will tend to switch what I grow. I will start to grow things like lettuce, leafy vegetables, things that like to grow in cooler weather. Radish, French radish grows great in this period of time. So I kind of switch out what I'm going to grow and sort of allow them to enjoy this cool weather and harvest them during this time. Then come February, March, when it gets hotter, then I start growing things like bitter gourd, loofah, pumpkins, those things that really love the sunshine. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, this is really very, very good, Chinru. Yeah, I enjoyed it very much. So now we'll want to invite our next speaker, Mr. Tan Hong Boon, to share his insights with us. Hong Boon, please.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Tan Hong Boon. Can you all hear me? Yeah. Yeah, I'm a graduate from NTU, Singapore, 1987, practicing civil engineer. Currently, I'm the chairman for Natural Farming Association Malaysia, and we are also involved in community farming projects in partnership and collaboration with the Ministry of Housing Malaysia. Next slide, please. For my speech today, I will go touch on the introduction, NAFM partners, coconut farm, target communities, OKU, disability farming, Orang Asli natives, community farming, B40 urban poor community, research and development, home gardeners, and global community. And that more or less summarize what I will speak on today. Yeah, next slide. Natural Farming Association Malaysia. Our vision is to make clean, high quality food available for a healthier society. And our members are composed of a lot of experienced organic farmers, new farmers, consumer groups, marketing people, and some general public people. My tagline to our members is like this, you see. Now, there are a number of us who have aged on past our 50 or in some 60 and some in the 70s. Okay, and a lot of us have accumulated a lot of planting knowledge. And this knowledge, if we do not pass on to the next generation, we will bring all this knowledge down with us to the grave. So it is better for us to utilize the time that we have and to contribute this knowledge to to the future generation and to other communities. So that was the attraction point where we draw in a lot of new members. Thank you. Next slide. Yeah, so we have our advisor, president of Srimas. Srimas is an organization that goes out to the villages throughout the whole country to try to convert the traditional paddy using a lot of chemical to make them a switch to plant organic paddy. So the president of this Srimas is one of our advisors. Of course, we are also recognized by the government as a partner collaborator for National community farming development. So we have been given a certificate to that effect, and that is our logo. Next slide. Yeah, so this is a rough picture of some of our members. Yeah, okay. So this is in one of our member farms. Not all our members are poor people. Not all are rich people. Some of them, they are done very well and very successful in life. Like this particular scene is taken from one of our members' farm, one of our committee member. So he has about 15 acres in Miss Mantin here, where he grow a lot of fruits and vegetables, and he built a swimming pool and built a resort there actually. Yeah, so we have our meeting sometimes at his place. Next. Yeah, okay. So my entry into community solving problem for farming, it started a couple of 2-3 years ago. I was invited by our friend P.T. Tan, some of you will know him, to speak on this ecosystem food forest. That was in Bentong. So I put forward the idea that food actually should be grown naturally, taking into consideration the environment, taking into consideration to simulate a kind of a forest, because a forest system has been in existence for thousands of years, and they are very strong, and they can withstand all kind of weather changes that the world has gone through, right? And when I gave the talk, and there was somebody inside there was listening very intently. After the talk was over, he came over to me and said, "Mr. Tan, I think we will need your help. See? We have a big piece of land, about 900 acres. We are trying to plant coconut, and we have been trying to plant this coconut for the last 3 years, and we failed. And so this is some of the thing that happened to them. They don't know exactly know why they fail, but they've been wasting a lot of money to do that. So they asked me to troubleshoot their planting problem. So this was some of the pictures that was taken on a site visit. Next slide. So I went there, I saw the problem. Right. It was too sandy, okay? The place was just not conducive for the young seedling coconut to grow in. It was too bare, the sun was too hot. So when I reached there in the afternoon sun, I took a batch of the sand that was on the ground where they were growing the coconut seedlings, you see. And the sand itself was burning hot. So I found out actually what caused the death of a lot of their seedlings that they've been that killed their seedlings for the last 3 years. And from there I told them this is actually an environmental problem. You all don't understand the nature and characteristic of the needs of the young coconut plant. First thing, you must cool down the area. So I suggested they put up the black netting to reduce the temperature. Right. And after they put it down like this, and you can see after the 2-3 months, it's starting to bloom and to grow very nicely. So from there they can carry on very nicely. So the knowledge, then I took note that actually not all farmers, not all people who venture into farming have complete knowledge of what they are going into. And many farmers actually suffer huge losses because of the lack of some of these basic essential knowledge. So from there, I was thinking that if we can gather all the experts together and form a support group and to minimize all these knowledge lack losses, then that money that is lost, that could have been lost, could be saved and to generate returns, a positive return for what I call a more productive food production. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that is about this going from farm to farm and other farms to troubleshoot the problem. So another area actually we went to visit to one OKU farm. Okay, and then we were seeing that they were having a problem. Initially, they were doing this aquaponics and so on, and the system, something went wrong, right? The system was not balanced. So hardly things were growing. So I approached the person in charge there and said, there is actually another thing that you can actually look at. You can use a plastic box like this, right? And make it to grow like in a terrarium, right? Where you can still access it. Okay, you people on wheelchair, they can still plant some vegetables, basic things inside there. And this terrarium box basically acts like a self-contained grow environment where you don't need to water the plants every day, where there is no pest to come and eat up your insect. So it is ideal for their usage. And so they took it up and they are working on this. And the last week, I think, the person got an award, a national award for doing this, using this terrarium box that we introduced to them. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the other aspect, the other community that we went into was the Orang Asli. Orang Asli, they have a land, they have space, but what some of them lack actually knowledge. Right. So they are very skillful in gathering jungle produce, but not into planting. So before the MCO, so I gave some of these long bean seedlings to some of the Orang Asli families and taught them to grow. So I tell them, you put the seeds in, you grow in. These long beans, they are actually producing their own fertilizer, nitrogen. Don't add fertilizer because they will kill the plant. And they are very sensitive to addition of fertilizer. As long as you don't add any kind of chemical fertilizer, don't add any chemical to it, they will grow and they can harvest. So 2-3 months into the MCO with COVID-19, they told me they had been harvesting and eating from these long beans for the last few months. Every 2-3 days they can harvest one plate. Every 2-3 days they can harvest one plate. So that supplement the protein requirement for the what they call it, for the Orang Asli. Yeah, next please. Next slide. Yeah, so this is another Orang Asli farm. So when I went there, I saw their bananas. They are all very thin. See? Right. So, and I asked them, what did you do? Or he said, oh, we are trying to control the grass, right, by spraying some what they call it, weed killer. So I have to advise them, look, number one, you're wasting money. Right. Number two, the roots of the banana plant is spread very wide. So when you spray the weed killer, you are also actually damaging the roots of the banana plant. Right. So I advise them, don't do that. Instead, they should be cutting the grass and use the grass and spread it around the banana plant to give it continual fertilizing effect. And so this is what happens when you give the banana plant a lot of these cut weeds and so on. Yeah. Next slide. So from Orang Asli, we go on to this community farming. The government initiated community farming in the face of COVID-19, hoping that more of the citizens can grow some food to supplement their income. And so we are invited to partner with the government to help out, to educate and to give knowledge to new volunteers who want to plant but don't know how to plant. And so we are there, and so we form a support group for new community farmers that are being set up. Yeah, together with our team members lah. And this is our advisor. This is Professor Anthony Wong. Right. Okay, next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So these are the so we mobilize our farm members, right, and to open up for teaching and for people to come and learn, because we anticipate that if the government were to launch this in full over the next few months or next year, then we will need a lot of places and training facility to absorb the number of people who want to learn. Right, so we have lined up 12. Next slide, please. Yeah, we have a lineup of 12 farms spread throughout Malaysia that is ready to take in these community farmers who want to learn. Okay, next slide. Yeah, from the community farming, the other aspect that actually of personal interest to me is how to help the B40 urban poor. Urban poor, B40 is a below 40 urban poor community who mostly lives in the city, lives in the apartment or flats. And one of the things that you can say is a taugeh box, very simple, small little box, right, with holes down there, and with this green little perforated sheet. Right, so the beans is just placed on top of this green piece. Right, all the taugeh will grow vertically straight. So when it comes to harvest, it's very simple. You just snip off all the roots, so it saves time. And so this particular box can be used and can be distributed to the B40 families. If they have no food, at least they can grow their own bean sprout with these boxes. And so we are actually applying for some grants from the government to give us the money so that we can give this, produce these boxes in volume and give it to the B40 communities. Next slide, please. That is the small version. This is the larger version, okay? This is the larger version. And this one has, is not for family, but this one is more for community farmer. The community farm, that means a group of people in a certain residential area and so on, they come together so they can grow taugeh in higher volume using the automatic system. Right, so you just put the beans in there, it's self-watering, auto timer, everything inside there. Yeah, carry on. Next slide, please. Yeah, the other thing that we look into are the problems that farmers have in the lowland. Most of our farmer members are located in the lowland. And one of the difficult things is to grow tomato, because most of the tomato on the market come from the highlands, you see. And so a lot of farmers are not really able to produce tomato to grow. And so we are testing out some of these lowland species. Yeah, we are testing out this lowland tomato species, which it seems to be working. Right, so now our farmer members are requesting the seeds of this and how to grow this. So this is one of our interesting things that we have found, and that can actually help a lot of our farmer members and as well as home gardeners in the lowland under hot climate temperature. The next one is this chili plant, okay, the chili bush. What you see is the result of our testing. Right, Malaysia actually import a lot of chili from overseas. We don't have enough chili because growing this kind of chili is very challenging. A lot of pests, a lot of pest problem. Right, so a lot of farmers fail, and after many failures, many of them actually gave up planting chili. Right, so I am testing out planting chili using the natural farming technique. And to date, yeah, I find it very fruitful. One particular plant like this, I can get about 50 chili, one plant, from one plant, 50 chili, and I don't spray any pesticide on it. And so this would probably be a game changer for a lot of our local farmers going ahead. Hopefully, it can solve the chili shortage problem in the country. Next slide, please. Yeah. we have something also for the home gardeners and also for the global community, which we cannot meet everyone. So I've put up something onto the Facebook. Okay, some of the techniques, natural farming technique, how to grow this successfully in a cheap and low cost way and effective way. So I've compiled some of this knowledge and break them into species by species or plant by plant type. So anybody, anyone from overseas or locally can access into my this planting group, yeah, and can join in into which particular plant that you're interested in, and you can go in and you can read the posting there. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah. So if any one wants to contact me, this is my email address, and we have a website, Natural Farming Association Malaysia.business.net. Okay. Thank you for listening in.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hong Boon, for your sharing. And we do have some questions from the audience here. So number one is, of course, Leon says he wants to join the community. He's living in Selangor, and how can he do it? So I guess your email address that you shared just now is one way that Leon can contact Hong Boon and join the community.
Yes. Right.
Okay,
Correct.
we have another very interesting question here. Can you grow rice at home?
Yeah, actually, I've grown rice at home. So I've successfully grown rice and harvested rice at home. What you need is a little a depression in your garden, right? And which can hold some water, right? And once you can have that muddy stretch with a bit of water, you can put the rice seedlings in there and you can actually grow rice. So I show you one of a picture, okay, of my rice plot. Yeah, you can grow rice at home. Yeah. So this is, can you see? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you can grow rice at home. Yes. Next.
Okay, so here's a related questions. Where to buy the rice seeds?
You can get from me. Yeah, you can get from me. Yeah, give me an address. I can post some to you.
Okay, so I guess for Yuming, you could go to the website, get Hong Boon's contact, and then from there you can request. Okay, there it is again in the chat box, Hong Boon's email address.
Yes.
Contact him if you want to join his community, or you get rice seeds, you can plant them at home.
Yes, you can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can to join the Natural Farming Association. You can go to the website. You can go to a website, and there is a form to fill in. Yeah, some fees to be paid. Yeah, then okay, you can join from there. Yeah. Then we have actually a WhatsApp chat group, an interactive WhatsApp chat group where the people with any planting problem, any planting issue, they can just type in, and our panel of experts will entertain the problem and give a solution to it. Yeah, so that is one of our main function, a support group of expert people. Yeah.
Okay, we have a follow-up question from Leon again. One problem he faces are rats, and he doesn't feel like killing them. So how do you control these pests?
Oh, then you got to bring in the snakes. Yeah, rats, they are much larger. So normally we use this what they call it rat trap. So if you don't want to kill them, after trapping them, then you can release them far away from where you are. Yeah, that's another way of solving the problem.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, this is really wonderful sharing by Hong Boon and also by Chinru. So ladies and gentlemen, we are about to wrap up tonight's session, but before we say goodbye, we will have an online poll for the audience. Please share with us your feedback. How do you find this session? And give us your feedback so that we can improve for our future sessions. So for the audience that have missed the earlier part of today's session, not to worry. We have actually made a recording of the session. And once we have done some minor editing, we will actually post it up so that you can access the recording for tonight's session. And for alumni out there and our supporters, please join our network. So you can see on the screen, this is our social media handles for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Telegram, and so on. So please feel free to join us and get connected with us. So once again, Chinru and Hongboon, thank you very much. This is really, really fantastic sharing. We've all thoroughly enjoyed ourselves. The big surprise to me and something I've learned actually is the Hokkaido Hokkaido melons. Right? I didn't realize that you could grow them in tropical climate. So thank you once again, and to the audience, have a good evening, have a good weekend. We'll see you again very soon.